Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Just in Time Education, which is a podcast for healthcare HR from Lean Human Capital and Healthcare Source. I'm Rebecca McNeil, Educational Content Manager for Healthcare Source, and I have David Zari, founder of Lean Human Capital and the Recruiter Academy, and my co-host with me today. Hi David.
Hello Rebecca.
So David, I wanted to call this episode, What's the Status of My Application? Because I feel like that sums up a common gripe recruiters have. We're inundated with phone calls from candidates asking, what's the status of my application? So this episode is about the challenges recruiters face and some quick advice on how to get through the day. Let's jump in and talk about 3 common recruitment challenges. Number 1. Unqualified applicants who don't get it. I'm talking about applicants who apply and they don't meet the minimum requirements for the role, and they repeatedly apply for roles they're not qualified for at the same healthcare organization. So I want to ask you, what's the best way to handle those folks and not waste too much time while still being polite and showcasing your healthcare organization in the right way?
Well, I think if we had the miracle answer, right, we'd both be retired. But I think you got to step back from it. And the biggest issue why these folks keep applying, one of the biggest, is they feel like they're a candidate, but they keep getting rejected. So they keep applying. Well, I feel like I'm a candidate. And to step back from that, I think it's because a lot of times as I work with customers and I work with healthcare organizations, I look at this minimum requirements versus actual requirements. And what they're posting out there on the internet is minimum requirements. And then I ask the question, well, would a candidate with minimum requirements be a good candidate for the job? They say no, they'd have to have more requirements. So I'm like, so why don't you post the actual job requirements and be very specific? Because sometimes these vague, nebulous minimum requirements, candidates feel like they're a candidate. And so that would be one thing that I'd recommend that you do, is really tighten up what does your posting look like so less people will apply. And so you have to deal with less folks like that you just mentioned. The second thing that we found, and the second piece with that is that we found that candidates want to opt into the process. We do a lot of voice of the customer survey work with our customers, and they want to feel like they're part of the process, not just applying and getting rejected. So if you can have them apply and then have a second step, and that could be your assessment. So thank you for applying, Rebecca. The next part of the process is this. And maybe that next layer is some assessments that clearly when they go through that question set, they know they're not qualified. That can help eliminate a lot of folks as well. If you allow them to engage into the process and then hit them. So those 2 things can really help with those chronic serial appliers, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. Behavioral assessments can help clue the candidates in a little bit better as to what the job's really about and what the culture of the organization's about. So it can certainly help weed out some of those candidates that aren't right. And also, you know, with an applicant tracking system, one of the nice things is you can set up filters. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but it will actually stop those candidates who don't meet the minimum requirements from continuing with the application, which is great. And that, I think, saves a lot of wasted time as well, and hopefully helps with that challenge. The next thing I have as a challenge is rogue hiring managers, and I think we all know who I'm talking about, those managers who do not follow the process set up by HR. So this is a little bit of an extreme example, but for example, a manager ignores HR's warnings about a, quote, minor criminal background charge and makes an offer to the candidate anyway, putting the healthcare organization at risk when they have to then rescind the offer. And this isn't probably a very common occurrence, but certainly there are those managers here and there that just don't follow the process no matter how many times you go over it with them. So what are some ways recruiters can better manage those rogue managers?
Education, education, education. This is when recruiters need to put on their business partner caps and, first off, ensure that they have a staffing level agreement. Need to educate the managers on what the process is and why the process is set up the way it is and why we have these rules, which kind of leads to my second point. So if you have a good staffing service level and the people understand that you just have to work through the process, you can't be making offers without these candidates going through the process, so you can't go behind the scenes. I think most importantly, though, is you must educate them on the consequence of not being fair and equitable with candidates. So use your extreme example, Rebecca. Educate them and give them a story. So for example, let's say, Rebecca, we hired this individual, and it's just a minor occurrence, but they have a criminal background. And let's say that heaven forbid that they come in and they hurt a patient, physically hurt a patient, and that comes on the 6 o'clock news. Or heaven forbid that they come in and we just turned away and they had a minor criminal investigation or background, and they stole thousands of dollars of drugs, and that shows up on a 6 o'clock news. Think about the impact to our healthcare system. So you need to educate your managers that we set up these policies for a reason, and give them stories and situations that could happen as a result of their activity, and that often can keep them in check. And then lastly, if they're chronic offenders, they need to be dealt with through the normal HR process.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So those are some great tips. And the next one, the next challenge, I know this is another one. If we had the miracle answer, we would both be retired. But one of the things that recruiters struggle with is, are candidates really telling the truth? When we did our healthcare HR superhero contest, a lot of folks said they wish their superpower was the ability to read the minds of their candidates, to see their true intentions and know if they really are a great fit for their organization. So, David, since recruiters can't really read minds, how can they solve this challenge?
Well, personally, this is a hot topic for me right now because I think we have a complete fundamental structural flaw in how we approach the hiring process. So strong statement, right? When we look at this, it's like this game, and when we talk about interview, assessment, screening out, filters, right? There's thousands of books written on how to hire top people. Conversely, though, there's thousands of books written on how to ace the interview. So it's this game, right? I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and you're going to try to answer them the correct way. It has nothing to do with what's the truth. So step back from that and think about that. And I think if you apply this idea of when you engage with a candidate, whether it's through technology or it's on the phone, and you have a heartfelt discussion, Rebecca, all I want to do today, let's say I'm interviewing you, all I want to do today is I want to understand what you want to do and what type of jobs you feel you'll excel in and be happy in. And then I'm going to look at what I have to offer here and see if there's a good match. We call interviews now professional discussions. I hate the interview word. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not a big fan of assessments. Matter of fact, I think the second thing you can do is have a good behavioral-based assessment. Honestly, 5-10 years ago, I wasn't a big fan of these tools, but tools like staff assessment from you guys, I think they're great tools because as I take them, it's like, wow, that's me. So I'm not saying that don't lose the forest through the trees. I'm not saying that we don't do assessment and we don't do testing, but it's how you guide the process and how you make the candidate feel. Because if you get them to understand that it's not about right or wrong, it's about what do you want to do, what do you think you're going to excel at, what are you best at, what makes you most happy, they start to answer honestly. And when they answer honestly, we get to the truth.
Right.
To me, that would be a way to start to avoid that. And as I talk to recruiters, I'd say be relaxed, don't be rigid. The best thing, and I'll ramble here for a sec, the best thing I learned early on was I learned nothing about interviewing. So I just sat across the table from people and said, hey, tell me about yourself. And people felt comfortable with me because I wasn't so rigid with my behavioral-based interview guide and my assessment filters. And I said, hey, man, what do you want to do? Let's talk about it. And I'd say, oh, geez, this is not great. This manager's not that way. Oh, okay, I don't want that job. I think you can get to the truth a little bit more if you approach it that way with some good behavioral-based assessment tools like staff assessment or other things.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good point. Well, thanks. I think, David, I think we have some good tips on these challenges. Of course, there's so many other challenges, and we'll have to talk about those in future episodes. Speaking of which, stay tuned for our next episode of Just-in-Time Education, where David and I will discuss 3 ways to eliminate recruitment waste. So until next time, thanks for listening.